we've got various people saying hello here.
Oh, nice little stream there.
Hi everyone, thanks for the messages. Yep. Yes, we have indeed tied it specially. That's quite correct.
I was impressed.
Yes. Well, it's like waiting for the start of a lecture, isn't it? We've got to can't
I don't know if there's ever quite such a hub of expectation.
Can't start too early. Okay, we're kind of on time now. We have cups of tea.
We do,
and we're hello. Yeah, I must remember not to look at the screen. I'm looking at the camera rather than that. And so I'll just kind of introduce. You may know I'm Rod Duncan, and so I'm the author of the books, and I'm very delighted to introduce Siobhan Logan, a very wonderful writer and indeed a publisher, a poet, a non-fiction writer, a lecturer in creative writing in De Montfort University, a colleague of mine for many years, and also a fellow member of Leicester Writers Club.
Yes, that's crucial.
And Siobhan's kindly come along to ask some questions and interview me about the book for this virtual book launch for The Fugitive and The Vanishing Man. And we have some questions already that have come in, and from around the world, from America, from Germany, from the United Kingdom and other places. And hopefully we'll get some more as we go. And there's quite a comment stream now coming up down the side. So if we miss your question, please do forgive us. But we'll try to get them all answered either here and now or afterwards. And
yes, quite a few.
The other thing to say is that if we judge your question to be the most interesting question or the most insightful or something special about it, then there is a prize going out from Angry Robot Books, the publisher, who've got something nice and readable for you. And also, if there are any photographs of the book out there in the wild, then that is another thing that we're going to have a few giveaways for as well along the way. And we're going to end up with some cake at the very end. Yes. So, Siobhan, thank you so much.
Well, yes.
I'll pass over to you.
So, a book birthday is always a joyful occasion, and how much more so when you've got this whole series. First the Fall of the Gaslit Empire, and then the Map of Unknown Things. And here we are with the 6th book altogether, the culmination of that series. So that is quite a special book birthday, and I'm delighted to be here. Okay, so I've got some questions of my own, and we've already got some questions coming in as well, so we'll dive in. I thought that for me, the beating heart of the book is really Elizabeth Barnabas, and not only of this book, but of the whole series. So I thought I would just start with some of the things that readers have said about Elizabeth, and how we kind of got to her. So this is a little comment from Emmy Itaranta, if I've got that right, the author of Memory of Water. And she was talking about Elizabeth in The Queen of All Crows, which is an earlier novel in the Map of Unknown Things series. And she said, among the fast-paced plot twists, the novel also provides keen insights into power structures, particularly when it comes to gender roles as social constructs. Elizabeth Barnabas is possibly my favourite steampunk main character ever. Resourceful, fearless, unusually observant and emotionally intelligent, I was thrilled to follow her to the ends of the world as a reader. And I think that really nicely sums Elizabeth up, actually, and the impact that she has within this series. So my first question was, how did you find Elizabeth Barnabas, or did she find you?
I think she found me.
Yes.
Yeah, I was writing what I thought was going to be a short story, and it was, those of you who've read The Bullet Catcher's Daughter, it's basically the first scene in that novel, and I was writing a story about a young male private investigator walking up a gaslit street in Leicester towards the clock tower. And it was to my surprise when subsequently she revealed herself as not masculine in the sense that I'd understood. And yet when I got to that point, when I found myself writing that, I looked back through that chapter that I'd just written, or short story as it was going to be, and I realized there were clues all the way through that I hadn't known that I was dropping in.
Right.
And she had this amazing voice, and it was one of those experiences where you kind of think, okay, I'm going to write down what you're telling me. And so in that sense, the experience was very much of her finding me.
Right. Yeah. And deciding when she was going to show herself and what she was going to show.
That's right. And now subsequently, and it was due to a comment that I got in Leicester Writers Club, actually, from Dave Martin. Dave, if you're watching, he said, put the reveal right up at the very first line. And so the very first line is, had I been a man,
yes,
I could have walked those streets. So that because gender identity and Elizabeth's gender identity was so much part of it, I couldn't hold it as a secret.
No,
it had to be announced right with the very first line, and Dave was, as so often, absolutely right about that.
And to be fair, I mean, although that was a discovery for you as the author, and that was like a wow moment, the reader is going to get some idea of that from the back blurb and everything about the way the book is presented and the way that it's kind of pitched. So yeah, that's kind of going to be there, isn't it?
And I think that's, people always say, don't give me spoilers. All right, that's the big phrase of the age, isn't it? No spoilers, please. But actually there have been studies, psychological studies, which have shown that people's enjoyment of a story can actually be enhanced by having spoilers.
Right.
And it's more or less universal, because the back cover of a novel typically gives you the story up to the first major plot point.
Yes.
And so all that is spoiler. And yet we kind of put our minds into this pretend ignorance where we kind of know, but play along with it and don't know.
Yeah.
So if you think of the opening of Jurassic Park, the first 5 chapters or so, this is from memory, I haven't looked at it recently, are some things out there on these islands, something nasty, some sort of monster. There's a picture of a dinosaur on the cover. So so that game, that cat and mouse game the author is playing with us, is one where we are kind of voluntarily keeping ourselves in a mock ignorance in order to enjoy this thing.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think we might come back later on to talk about the preoccupation with magic and trickery and conjuring in the novel, but there's all of that going on with both the writing of the novel and the marketing of the novel and so on as well, isn't there? Yeah. So Elizabeth found you, and I know that the first 3 books in the Gaslit sequence were very much from Elizabeth's point of view. That this isn't the first time you've written from a female viewpoint as your central character, but yeah, this has been quite an extended series. What was that like to, as you say, she had such an interesting voice, and voice not only in terms of how she talks, but the way she thinks about the world, and what was that like to write in that voice?
Yeah, it's again an interesting question. It was natural. I mean, it was the voice, and I don't mean that I got it right all the time first time. I have had as we all have, help from fellow writers, and sort of hello to Terry Bradshaw, who's been a beta reader of mine for some time, and has on occasion pointed out where the character of Elizabeth has not been quite as true to how people might perceive her gender as in other places. And so I have made tweaks along the way, but by and large they haven't been many. And this question of a male author writing from a female viewpoint, it's a strange question as people puzzle over it in a way they would not puzzle over an individual man or an individual woman behaving in a way that was slightly ambiguous in terms of gender or cross gender. So we accept individuals who we meet as individuals. We don't expect any person we meet to be a perfect exemplar of some idealized construction of gender. And yet with characters, particularly when there's a difference between the perceived gender of the writer and the character, this question is asked. And I'm not complaining about that, but it's an interesting thing. And I think what all you need to do is to get beyond the point where people are asking or thinking about the author. Really, if you can get them to forget about the author, if you can lead them in by that trickery and sleight of hand into the story enough, then they construct. The reader constructs the character, and then it's perfectly true to the perception of the gender of the reader of this particular character. So actually, I think it's the reader who's doing the heavy lifting in terms of constructing things like gender or individuality.
So you've told us the story of how Elizabeth found you and how she introduced herself into the world of the story. Did you find that happened a lot, that the character led the story and you kind of followed? Or is there a sense of, the world that you're taking her into and some of the events that she's going to encounter? How far are you steering her towards those events, and how far is she running away down the road?
I was talking to the wonderful author Jeff Noon a year or so ago about plotting, and we talked about various things, but there's something he said that really struck me as profoundly true. And he said, writing a novel is kind of like playing chess with the novel. You make your move, and the novel makes its move, and you have to respond to each other. So I think there's a kind of iterative process. I may have plans, and typically what happens for me is that my plan for the outer journey, the physical getting from here to there and facing this external challenge, I'm in control of to some extent. But the inner journey, the psychological journey, and what it means to the character, I can't anticipate until I write it. And so that surprises me usually. And so I don't usually know the ending point in terms of its emotional impact until I get there. But I have to discover that. I don't find it, and there the characters are teaching me.
So that's an interesting idea as well, the internal and external journeys that you're going through. So maybe we'll just have a look at some of the questions that have come in from readers. Let's think.
So these are questions that came in before we started. Started broadcasting. I can see there's a great big train of stuff on the side. I'm just going to have a quick look if there are any question. Hello to people who've said hello. Yay, we have sound. That's good. Otherwise, this is not going to be terribly good. Hi, Richard Sheehan. Hi, Jacob Ross. Thank you so much for all your support and help along the way. And Doug, Lindsay. So yeah, and you're talking to each other. That's great. That's very good. So the longish question from Lindsay. Maybe we'll get back to that. And hi, Jane. I see you're there. Maria. Yeah. So let's leave that for the moment and go into these questions.
So we had a question from Jess from Mississippi in the USA. While writing, was there any character you felt more drawn to than others?
Okay.
Any favourites?
So yeah, well, it's like which of your children is your favourite? Isn't it? That's a really interesting question. I actually find that quite hard to answer. I think when I'm writing a character, I have to be fully engaged with that character. So I suppose in the process of writing a scene with a character, they are my favorite character. They have to be. And having said that, I suppose over the books in general, naturally enough, Elizabeth has been that the character who I've found most engaging to write. Tinker, I just adore, and he is very easy to write. He's very natural. Actually, it's Jacob. If you're, I saw Jacob had commented there, gave me a really good writing tip about writing character, and considering. Maybe I shouldn't give away the secret, but there's something
the conjurer's tricks.
Yes, something that I applied very much to Tinker from that. Imagining him, imagining an alter ego for him in a sense of a particular animal, and then I just use the words to describe him as if he was that particular animal.
Interesting. And, it's a little bit like Philip Pullman's Demons and so on.
Yeah, and with Tinker, it just he is much more his creature than any of the other characters, and so he's very, very easy to write in that sense.
Yes.
You may guess what that creature is.
I seem to remember you saying that Tinker you had thought was only going to have a small part and was going to disappear again, but he's just stayed, hasn't he?
I can't get rid of. I mean, in a sense,
because he follows Elizabeth.
He follows Elizabeth. Yeah, he's absolutely devoted to Elizabeth, and I can't shake him. I can't get rid of him, and people wouldn't forgive me if I did.
Yeah, every time she thinks she's arranged it, so he can't possibly be there. Yeah.
So yeah, there's Tinker and Julia again. I adore her, and I adore her because she's so different from Elizabeth, and in a way, those two characters are there to show each other. In by contrast,
they throw a spotlight, don't they?
Yes, because all that nuance and uncertainty that Elizabeth carries, Julia doesn't carry. She has a great virtue of a simple certainty about her, and so her conscience is untroubled, whereas Elizabeth's conscience is constantly troubled.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, Jess, I can't give you more than that.
He loves all his creatures. Right. Do you want to pick a question out from the live chat while it's there in front of us?
Right. Tinker should have his own book, says Barry. Hello from the Netherlands. Hello there.
Lots of lovely congratulations and book birthday messages.
Hello, Gwyneth. Hi. Yes. So. Spoiler alert for
Lindsay's
for
got
Lindsay.
Quite a few spoilers there about what happens.
You're quicker at reading this than me. So I always said that I had the last scene planned for a long time. And she'd like to know which last scene. I think probably the one that I talked to you about is the very final scene in a book that's not yet written. So, and that might get round to, and there may be that question: are there going to be more books? May be there.
Yes, there was a question from Amy, which was quite similar. This is Amy from Leicestershire. How much has the end of this book changed from what you originally planned at the beginning of the series?
I think. In terms of the outer journey, as I said, that the physicality of Elizabeth being in a certain position, and particularly a certain relationship with the patent office.
Right.
That I knew from back when I was writing The Bullet Catcher's Daughter. By the end of book 6, or the end of the second trilogy, she would have got to that place that she is. I'm almost releasing spoilers here. But I think the question, Lindsay's question, is really about the very final thing. As originally planned, there were 3 trilogies, so 9 books. And so I know kind of where that would end. Now, presently, I'm thinking if I'm going to write that end, that I would try to get it done in one book rather than another three.
Yeah.
That's just as my hair is going grayer as we go along. I don't know how many years I can manage this. But I do know kind of where it would have to end. Yeah, that's been implicit in my planning right from the beginning. But I don't necessarily know what that means in terms of the emotional journey. And that's the same for this question about this book. Yes, I knew where the outer journey would be, but I didn't know what that would mean to Elizabeth in her emotions. And that sort of discovery.
Okay, so we've thought a little bit about the character, so I want to focus a little bit on place and setting, and I'm thinking about the way that we started with the bullet catcher's daughter and that really extraordinary journey we've taken from that. So we started with this city that we're in, Leicester tonight. We started with a divided city, a city with a kind of wall running through it, dividing two kingdoms. How did the real city of Leicester provide inspiration for the world of that first trilogy?
I think it was actually the whole genesis of it, that it and I know I've said this, forgive me, I've said it before, but it's those glimpses of the Victorian infrastructure that is everywhere in Leicester, just underneath the surface, and it's that, you know, those
or just
places,
above the shop fronts.
Yeah. You look up above the plate glass and you see the you know, the inscriptions underneath the eaves of the terraced houses, or where the road surface breaks up, and you see the cobbles underneath, and you look at those cobblestones and the upper surface is polished smooth, and it's iron rimmed cartwheels and hobnails on boots that have polished those stones quite so smooth, and that's an extraordinary thing. And living in Leicester for quite a number of years, it's just that sense of the presence of those 100 years before architects of you know, and builders and navvies and all the people who walked around that area, and you know, getting our terraced house renovated, and the gas fire comes off, and there's the fireplace behind, and there's an iron bar across the gap in the chimney space where a kettle would have hung, and it's just everywhere you look, just from the surface. So that, and my desire to just find a way, and I know this, whenever I say it, it sounds stupid to me, to my own ears, but it's nevertheless my emotional response to living in that proximity, is that I wanted to find a way of bringing that time back to be present today. And so we get the alternate history, which holds back the progress of science and technology. And so we have arrived in the present day, and yet it still has that kind of gaslit.
We're still kind of catching up with that, you know, 6 books on, really, aren't we? That sense of the time slip.
And it was always intended that the very final book would be in 2014. That was always, it was going, the very final August 2014. That's where.
Oh wow. I can't believe that we've got through the 6 books in that time period.
But we haven't got to that yet. That would be still the
that's still ahead.
Still the bit ahead.
So the second trilogy is called The Map of Unknown Things. And in this second trilogy, we move from a divided city to a divided world. So we have the gaslit empire versus the wilderness, as it were. And again, just diving into some of the things that readers have said about this. This is Claire Littleford, the author of The Quarry. I've read all of the books in the Fall of the Gaslit Empire series, and I love how inventive the whole series is. Each book has a strong story and fantastic characters. The Map of Unknown Things takes us outside the main Gaslit Empire to other parts of the world that the author has created. I love that these are great adventure stories, but also have a more thoughtful side to them. The worlds we visit are all very different and flawed in very different ways, but inhabited by people who have been shaped by the nature of those worlds. It's very clever, but also very engaging, and I find myself completely drawn in, unable to predict what will happen next. And she talks about having a strong sense of an overall plan to the whole series. And I remember that moment of coming to the first book in the Map of Unknown Things, which is The Queen of All Crows, and just that excitement of, oh, we're not in Leicester or the divided England anymore. We're way out in the Atlantic with whaling boats and all kinds of things, pirates and so on. So there is an extraordinary sense of kind of moving around the world like that. How did you map that sprawling world for yourself? Is it all just in your head, or?
So there is, I think, when you develop an alternate world, there's a kind of the law of consequences takes place.
Right.
So I remember so writing those scenes in Leicester. So we have a divided city, and I started to work out what the parameters of that the two different countries are. And then we kind of move slightly further afield, and we go down to London, and so I have to think, oh, now what can I derive from what we've already written to understand what London will be like.
Yeah.
And I remember it was probably the Custodian of Marvels we were launching some time back, and Jacob, who's watching here, Jacob Ross, asked me, "Is there slavery in the Gaslit Empire?" And I thought, I haven't actually needed to answer that question yet.
Yeah.
But now it's been put to me, and now because I know that we're going to have to move, we're going to be moving west towards the Americas. I'm going to have to answer that as a huge question. So then I had to kind of spend, a month or so pouring through histories of the lead up to the American Civil War and the end of slavery in America, and slowly coming to some kind of understanding of what happened.
Yeah.
But I didn't plan that from the start.
Right.
It's kind of an implication. You move.
So it's opening out. Yeah.
And in moving to beyond the Gaslit Empire, I always knew that what I wanted to show was societies that were in contrast.
Yeah.
That were the opposites of various aspects of the Gaslit Empire. So the three societies that she visits in these three books of this series, the Map of Unknown Things, are all pitching something that is the opposite of an aspect of the society that she's with. And again, thank you to Dave and Jacob, because some years ago we sat down together for a day and talked through our various stories that we were working on. We were talking about The Bone Readers, a wonderful novel by Jacob, and we were talking about different things, and I was saying, look, I've got this trilogy to write, and I really don't know anything about it, and I'm afraid that maybe I won't be able to write it. And you guys both said, oh, don't worry, there's so much here to write, and gave me a push, and I did carry on and write. We do have, Dave has been commenting that how come I'm appearing on the internet without being arrested by the patent office. Barry says that this is clearly restricted technology.
Indeed.
There was a
unseemly science.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a question here. Jacob asked, when you write about a character experiencing strong emotions, do you also experience those emotions while in the process of describing them? I want to kind of answer that. Absolutely, yes. And to the extent that if I'm writing a character who's feeling nauseous, I will feel nauseous, and I'll need to stop after a period of time. If I'm writing about a character who has sciatica, my back will start to seize up. I'll need to get up and walk around.
Wow.
And so that is, I wish I could do it without.
Yeah.
But that's absolutely the engine of what I do.
So it's often seemed to me that an author creating a character, moving a character through a narrative, is very like the process that actors go through.
The method.
Yeah, the methods, summoning kind of memory and, experience, and the alchemy of that, inhabiting the character and finding their way of walking through the world and so on.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think so. And I quite often say the thing that I need to get before I can write a book is the voice of the book. But to some extent that is and finding the way to be that principal character, which is filtered through the narrative voice, whatever that is. But there is a kind of interaction there with the principal character. So I think in part what I'm doing is finding out who it is, which comes out through the narrative voice, and then the story goes.
So Map of the Unknown Worlds, in this third book, The Fugitive and the Vanishing Man, there's quite a lot of discussion from Elizabeth and other people about the gaslit empire being referred to as the civilized world, and everything outside of that is the wilderness. And of course there's a huge point of view thing about that, isn't there? Like who decides, which corner of the world is civilized, and and the values that are represented by that. And it's very interesting to find that Elizabeth now has become the person who's talking about the civilized world of the gaslit empire. How conscious were you of those aspects in this book?
Very conscious, and actually I've been conscious of that from the outset, right from it. And it's been a kind of a conceit that I've been holding, that this and you'll find it kind of, if you look back through those earlier books, the first trilogy, the characters and indeed there's sort of sense of the narrator may not be entirely Elizabeth. There's a slight gap there, but there's a profound prejudice about everything that's beyond, and I just let that go without comment. But here with these books, when she does venture out, then it's
and she encounters characters with their own worldview, that's
who regard themselves as the civilized ones.
we're the good guys, and and of course crucially in this book she meets Edwin, and we should really start to talk about Edwin. So I wanted to look a little bit at how the character of Edwin Barnabas is introduced, and I'm very kind of wary of spoilers, but
it is on the back cover.
It is on the back cover. Elizabeth and Edwin Barnabas are going to perform the grand illusion of the Vanishing Man. So she has fled beyond the boundaries of the gaslit empire, and we know that right from the start of the novel. And then in chapter 2 we have this very interesting character from that world beyond the gaslit empire who is introduced, and I was very struck by how the introduction of this character really mirrors the way that Elizabeth first walked into our world way back in The Bullet Catcher's Daughter. So stop me if I'm going too far, but
this is chapter 2.
This is chapter 2, and this is our first glimpse of this figure. So we have: there a slim figure stood, dressed in white, with a blue scarf rippling behind. Flashes of green and turquoise at her neck were long enamel earrings. She had been staring towards the furthest point upriver, sometimes shielding her eyes against the brightness of the sky. Then 2 guards arrive and summon her to the king. "Will he want to see me?" she says, "like this?" And they decide they're not going to answer that question. So she has to make up her own mind. And she thinks better perhaps that she did not approach him in that dress, though changing would mean a delay. So she goes back to her own room. And then we have this scene where, stripping down, she laid the blue silk scarf and white dress on the bed. A slim, muscular figure was revealed in the mirror. And then donning trousers and shirts felt like stepping into a different facet of who they were. They sat in front of the mirror. So what we're getting is this shading from she's standing there with the scarf and so on. She's summoned. She goes back to her room. Then it's the slim, muscular figure. Then it's who they were, and they sat in front of the mirror. And then Edwin unclipped the earrings, started to wipe away the makeup. Leaving a trace would allow for a more androgynous look, but truth is a luxury for more settled times. And so he dresses himself in the male attire, and notes that the boots transform him more than any other external thing. She had arrived in the room with delicate precision, but in leaving, he closed the door with enough force to send echoes reverberating along the stone corridor. And I thought that was fascinating, the way this character is introduced, and we're very close into his viewpoint. So we have that whole shading of gender pronouns, as well as how he negotiates all the nuances of how should I dress today and what does this occasion call for and so on. Really beautiful piece of writing in terms of how you handle that. Were you aware of how much that mirrored the way you introduced Elizabeth in the very first novel?
No.
Because
No.
it really struck me.
I think Edwin has a much more clear understanding of their own relationship to gender.
Yeah.
And Elizabeth does not, and did not, and so here we get for the first time a more nuanced self-reflection, on the issue that's been there throughout the whole thing.
Yes, yeah. So then we've now got the setup for these two characters to discover each other and begin to interact, and I think one of the things that's very moving about this story is that they are two lost twins, you know, like all those Shakespeare plays,
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
they are the two lost twins who have found each other. And there's a little bit later on where she reflects on what that means to her. That how
careful now reading later on.
Very careful. Just this phrase about a void that she'd not previously been aware of had been filled. That's so important to her, because we've encountered her as an orphaned figure really at the start of the series, and now, you know, kind of quite late on in the series, she's heard this rumor that there is this other person from her family that she might be able to find, and she does track him down in this book. And so they are these two lost twins, and yet they also embody the conflict of their parents, and at a larger level of these huge social forces that are coming into conflict in the world. So you mentioned earlier about the internal journey and the external journey, and I thought one of the things that was so powerful about this novel is the way that you've got that emotional pull and push, because they're so drawn to each other. They are these two halves fitting around each other, and yet they are constantly pulling away as well.
Yeah.
How did that work in terms of writing it?
So this is something I've always liked to do, is to get ideas that are in conflict, that are mutually exclusive. You know, they can't both be right. They can't both exist together, but both of which I feel a sympathy for, and kind of give those views to different characters.
Yes.
And then see how the characters clash, see what happens. And so I did always know that this book was going to have quite a strong sort of philosophical underpinning, and that I knew that there were going to be a number of conversations in this book between characters where I gave space for not action, but a profound discussion of ethics and how they might be expressed. So that was there, you know, as an intention, and I suppose it all kind of followed from that. That but of course, those passages of discussion are really, really hard to write.
Yes.
Because you can write them, but will anyone read them? So it's a matter of trying to find what the imperative of narrative drive gives you. So I can have a conversation, and two different viewpoints can be expressed. But then, if the readers are going to read through that whole thing, then they have to feel a sense that they're moving, that something we're getting somewhere, that there's something is changing, some power dynamic is changing through that scene, or
and in their relationship,
and
because they are strangers when they meet.
Yes,
really,
So I think in kind of navigating that issue, that problem, how do you have a conversation that has a drive to it, and how do you have it be basically a philosophical conversation and have the drive to it, and how do you put these two characters together with different viewpoints? With all those constraints, I think it kind of writes itself in a way that once you've got, if there's enough inherent conflict within the situation, then it will kind of work. And so
there's a lot emotionally at stake in all of those philosophical conversations, because each of them is a kind of outsider who is trying to find their own way of how can they exist in the world and move through the world. And then there's the question of whether they can do that together or not as well. And
outsiderness is the other major theme through the books, that most of the characters I've written about have been outsiders in one way or another. People who feel out of step with society around them. And so these two characters both do, but in slightly different ways, or they're navigating that in slightly different ways.
So should we have a look at some more of the questions or comments?
Well, people are talking quite a bit about the various drinks that they have. Various
mug of tea here.
We've got mugs of tea.
Lindsay talks about being into clothes, and being fascinated to know how you get into the idea of how clothes maketh the man, as it were, or woman.
So that is interesting. I've done a lot of research about that. I'm anyone who knows me knows that I'm not very aware of clothing myself, or the way I dress is kind of haphazard. My life has been punctuated by a variety of poor clothing choices, I think. So I've done quite a lot of research, reading about people and listening to people talking who have particularly non-standard relationships to the way gender is understood within their societies. And but I think it is the same with all these things. You just like feeling nausea if your character is nauseous, that you've got to imagine those clothes, imagine wearing those clothes, imagine walking, imagine, put yourself as much as you can within that
I noticed you pay quite a bit of attention to how they walk, and that's the kind of last thing that clicks into place, and the most there's a Channel 4 series some years ago called Faking It, where they got people to pass themselves off as other kinds of people, and I remember one scene where someone was being trained to, someone who had a very upper middle class or upper class background, who was trying to pass themselves off as I think this one was a nightclub bouncer from a very working class background. And there's the whole way they moved. They had this person walking round and around the room and training them to roll the shoulders, so it's kind of things like that. Really, really watching things like that. But clothes, it's slightly artificial for me to think about, so I have to kind of purposefully do that, because I think Elizabeth's very aware of clothes. I'm not, and so I kind of have to do that research and consciously
put her eyes, a lot of this is the eyes of the narrator.
Yeah.
Where do the eyes of the narrator fall? So do they fall on her cuff or on the cuff of someone else, and note that it's a tight cuff or whatever?
These are really important signifiers for Elizabeth.
These are very important signifiers for Elizabeth. I know nothing about them, and so I have to specifically research those tiny little details.
Yeah.
And it's not that I understand the big spread of it, but I've just got to find one or two telling details to drop in, and then hopefully the readers who do know, like Lindsay, like you do, you will fill in the rest and believe somehow that miraculously I do know about this stuff when I don't.
Yes. Right.
Lindsay's chortling.
I might bring in one or two of the questions we've got here. So how did you tunnel through the hard times as a writer? And what words of advice can you give to other writers on rejection and hardship? And this is from Devia in Berlin.
Devia in Berlin.
Yeah.
Yes. How do you? Yeah, it is a tunneling match, isn't it? A wrestling
That's
match.
a very nice image.
Yeah, I think of it as wrestling.
Yeah.
And I think every novel puts up its own fight.
Ah, yeah.
And every novel will try to fight you in a different style, in a different way. And you have to kind of learn how to wrestle with that particular story to get it not into submission, but into some kind of accommodation with you. And it is a struggle, and I think every writer struggles. I think that's just a universal thing. And if we didn't struggle, frankly, I don't think it would be worth it, because I think it is that struggle that helps us to discover the stuff that goes into a novel that makes it worth reading.
Yes.
And it is difficult, and you have to have a very long view. You have to think, I'm writing something now that's way down the line, a year and a half later, people might get to see. And it's somewhat easier once you've kind of got one or two books published, and you have a more reasonable expectation of getting published with the thing you're writing. But it's still difficult, and so I will, I would regard part of my practice, part of my creative practice, my artistic practice, as walking.
Yeah.
I walk, and I like to walk in the hills, and I tend to follow the same paths over and over again. And I photograph.
Yes.
You may have seen my photographs of this sort of thing. But while I'm walking, I'm thinking. And part of that thought is putting myself into the mind of the characters and speaking as if I'm them. And part of it is just imagining the book finished.
Yes.
Just visualizing it finished, imagining that thing when it's done,
Yeah.
And I think this is something that a lot of people who are able to work on very long-term projects tend to do, is visualize the end point.
Yeah.
And that would be my takeaway for anyone.
Yes.
Don't think it's indulgent.
No.
It's important. Otherwise, how are you going to keep going?
Yeah. Yeah, you need to kind of map your way through, really, don't you? Yeah. So let me see. Yes. So thinking about the challenges as a writer writing this book, one of the things that struck me about The Fugitive and The Vanishing Man that may have been tricky is that Elizabeth seems to spend quite considerable stretches of time locked in a room. And this is a character who, is very physically active, and has got a lot of agency and a lot of boldness about her. But she is at times reduced to just pacing up and down this room thinking, if only I could go outside without being spotted and all the rest of it. How did you find that, and how did you kind of work your way around that? So I think that constraint is very much there. And so I think if you tell a story that is restricted in time, so it's taking place within a tight period of time,
where every day and every hour matters,
Mm.
and within a tight space.
Yeah.
If you can do it, then it kind of gives that pressure cooker feeling.
Yeah, it did feel like you'd kind of painted her into a corner.
Yeah. So I think it's obviously story is about change, and part of that's change of place and change of state in various ways.
Yeah.
But if you take away that opportunity for change, I think it builds the pressure.
Yeah.
And we did have other views outside that kind of prison, so I think that released the pressure a little bit.
Yeah, because in this second trilogy that it moves through different viewpoints, and we're not just with Elizabeth all the time, so we're getting to see a lot of things that are going on around her in that world. And then there are times when she is very active and is getting up to all sorts of daring do in the way that we love from Elizabeth as well. Yeah, and another thing that I think keeps recurring in this book is a fascination with conjuring, magic, trickery, mind reading, and all of that. And I know some years back you wrote a novel called The Mentalist, so it isn't the first time.
Do I have it here? I don't
it's
know,
probably
maybe
lurking around somewhere. It's not the first time by any means that you've been exploring this, but it's I mean, there's lovely circus scenes in the first novel, The Bullet Catcher's Daughter, and we're back, as the back blurb tells us here, we're awaiting this grand illusion of the Vanishing Man. So Elizabeth and Edwin are going to perform this amazing trick at some crucial point in the story when everything is riding on it. Where does that come from, that it's been such a kind of consistent thread?
Well, I'm really interested in it, as you may guess. So my father used to be really, really interested in conjuring, and fascinated in the mechanics of it, yes, but particularly the psychology of it. And so we used to talk about this a lot. And it is just fascinating to me. I can't explain quite why. We used to sit down and we would watch, magic shows on television, Paul Daniels, things like this. And my father he would video them. And we would go through
and unpick
frame by frame. And he would say, that's where it's happened.
Right.
And so
you were very aware of misdirection and all of that.
All that kind of stuff. Yeah. And so I suppose it started there, but it kind of seems to me kind of really close to what we do as writers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All those tricks, the misdirection, that sleight of hand that we use within our toolbox as writers. So I can't explain it beyond that.
Yeah. I thought in this story it was interesting when Elizabeth and Edwin come together, because they both know this world and these arcane arts, but they also have, I think, a slightly different skill set, because he's more of the ingénieur. He kind of works out how to build the tricks, the cabinet for the Vanishing Man and all of that, and she's got a really sharp sense of the psychology of how to deliver the trick.
Yes.
When they come to it.
And behind the whole story is the story of their past that they're uncovering.
Yeah.
And this comes, I don't want to say too much about that, but this kind of, the fact that they have these different takes on it comes to their different, to things that have happened to them since they last saw each other, effectively.
Yes, because they've been separated since quite young children. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Very good. Now, let me see.
So we've got various. How much of your photographic exploration relates to your writing process?
That's a really good question.
And the answer is I'm trying to figure that out. Partly I take photographs in order to teach me to see. I'm really, it'll sound strange when I say it, I'm really not a visual person, in the sense I can go for a walk and really not see anything, and in the sense that I don't see anything beyond the bare minimum of where my feet need to go to not fall over. And I'll come to the end of a walk and I won't be able to tell you anything about what I've seen. And I'm aphantasic, so I can't make pictures in my head. And so
which has always amazed me, because I get such a strong visual sense from your novels, but it's also that thing of what the reader brings, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And so taking photographs is kind of related to helping me to learn to see, as it has been doing. I think a couple of years ago to now, my visual sense is far more developed, and it is definitely through the process of photography. And I can see parallels, and I would certainly see the photography and the walking and the writing as all part of a creative practice, and teaching as well. I teach creative writing in Mumford University. And so all those things I think of as part of my creative practice, but I'm not really aware yet of how they directly relate to each other. I'm sure they do, and I can see very close parallels in the processes. So the photography, I will go back again and again and again and photograph the same thing many, many times in order, just looking for those slight variations to try to understand the thing. And in the same way with the writing, I will edit and edit and edit over the same thing many, many times. It's in a way I'm very bad at it. I just take a long, long time over it. But I think it is that repetition, and it's those finding those little glints of truth through that process that enables such quality as there is in it to come out. So I can see parallels, but I'm still exploring that, and maybe ask me in another couple of years and I might have a better answer.
Yes. Yeah.
Lindsay asks about the final trick. I'm going to be very careful.
We can't say too much about that, but yes, we've talked about the importance of conjuring.
The importance, planning a big finale conjuring trick, I will say, is just like writing a heist story. It kind of is. You have to write it backwards. You have to kind of know mechanically what the end of that process is, and then and work back. So it's a very artificial process of writing in a way. You're not kind of linearly writing through. You're kind of making it backwards.
I wonder about that because so often across the series of 6 books, we see Elizabeth managing some amazing escapes from impossible situations. And do you just imagine an impossible situation for her and then do the problem solving of how to...
Yeah, I go for a walk and I figure, how on earth am I going to get her out of this?
But just put her in a locked room and then work out.
So in the first book, there's a scene where she escapes from a locked wagon, which is barred and everything like that. I
remember that so vividly.
And I can remember walking around out here around the estate, just kind of thinking, how can I do that? And that is very much a conjuring trick. Yeah, it's absolutely a conjuring trick. She sets it up like a conjuring trick, with the psychology of a conjuring trick, misdirection, and sorts it out.
Yeah.
Right. What have we got? You guys have said so many things here, and I'm sure I've missed a whole load of stuff. And I'm just going to have a quick go back and just see if there's any questions we've. Someone's who's who? 1913. Time travel research ? There's a long story about that. I'm not going to go into it. I'm so sorry, but well, just very, very briefly, you'll see there's my family has a Tolstoy connection, and that's part of that research. Yeah. Let's see. Yes, we've answered one of Lindsay's questions. Gwyneth, quickly reading through here. Thank you so much for all the lovely messages, by the way. It's really does, means a great deal to me. Barry saying that Tinker should have his own book. Amy says Tinker is a puppy, I think.
The animal.
I'm not going.
Self.
I'm not going to say. Could be. The chess analogy is good. Says Zuni. That Jeff Jeff Newton gave me that.
That's something I'm really going to take away, that doing a chess game with your book. Yeah.
Thank you, Dave, for the congratulations.
This was quite an interesting one. In The Fall of the Gaslit Empire, I felt as if The Divided England was a character in its own right and a foil for Elizabeth. What was it like losing that character when you moved into the second trilogy?
Oh, that's a good, really good question. Is that Nick? Okay, so I think actually I don't feel I did lose it, because it's constantly there in mirror image. So all the different elements, all the vices of the Gaslit Empire are explored in their opposite form, where they are still vices as an opposite. So a fiercely patriarchal society we see, and now a different example of a equally fiercely matriarchal society, which we discover has its own very profound problems associated with it. An over-constriction of law in the Gaslit Empire. Then we see in Newfoundland obsessive fixation with the lack of law, and we kind of find out problems associated with that. And in this the Gaslit Empire's constant quest for sort of stasis and lack of change, in Oregon we see this kind of completely overturned, and we see the driving obsession with change and overturning the existing order. So in each case, so I think the Gaslit Empire's shadow is right over these books in that sense.
Yeah.
People saying hello to each other. I like that England was so different, so why wouldn't other parts of the world be their own very different microcosms? Is very good. Questions about the internet. Here we go down. Bear with us for a moment. Clothes.
Yes, we were looking at the clothes.
I think.
So
hi, James.
Yeah, and there was somebody there saying that the fantastic quality is the source of your most enduring visual images, a lot like the wood texture images in your photography. It makes you focus in on details quite sharply, doesn't it?
So I think there is, I mean, I do think this is a parallel, because I'm dyslexic and I'm aphantasic. So the photography, in a sense, is looking at the aphantasic part, whereas the dyslexia is looking at the writing part. And in each case, I lack automaticity with these things. These things do not come naturally for me at all. And so I think it is, and I don't say that as a complaint, or as some sort of look how hard I try. But I think it works the other way. I think because these things are not automatic, it enables me to see, or to look in the case of the photography, or to find language in the case of the writing, that are a little bit off the normal. And I think it's the fact that I have to consciously intervene in both those processes is the thing that helps me, I think.
So I was really struck by, there's a character in the novel who encounters both at different times, both Edwin and Elizabeth, apparently as the same person, and they don't know the secret that there are two of them. But they make this observation that there's something about you that's different, and it's about the way you come into the room, and every little thing you do is done with such precision, as if it was a learned thing. And that panics Edwin a bit, because he thinks this person has got some powerful intuition actually, and is going to catch us out. But it really struck me that it was that whole kind of performative thing about the way they're enacting their characters, including gender as an aspect of that, and that there's something similar there to the writer and the tricks that the writer is.
That's interesting. Yeah. I don't have an answer for that. That's an interesting observation. Yes. Yes.
Something in that. Yeah.
Oh gosh, the big questions are coming in now. So to what extent, Jacob asks, is your work a comment on humanity, contemporary society, the world as it might have been, or none of them?
Wow.
For me, it's a comment on humanity and society and the processes of that we see played out in history. When you study history, you've got one example. That's what happened. And we can speculate on it, and people can say, well, did it happen because of this or because of that? But when you get into this area of counterfactual history or speculative fiction or alternate history, you can run it as many times as you want, and you can experiment. So I suppose it's my attempt to understand these things and understand historical processes, and understand theories of change. I think that's where it gets to.
Yeah.
I don't think the world we're living in is ideal. I would like there to be a better world. What's my theory of change to get there? And in working through these kinds of things, I'm experimenting with those theories of change. And to commentary, I don't suppose I'm not really trying to make it commentary. I'm exploring it, and I suppose in that exploration there you can read it as commentary if you like, but I think it's primarily kind of my exploration. That's a profound question.
Yeah, it is. And you mentioned speculative fiction there, giving you a kind of space to do that. I wonder if we might talk a little bit about genre, because I know that something you mentioned recently is that somebody had observed, perhaps in one of their reviews, that in these 6 books, each of them seems to go into a different kind of subgenre. And I wondered, does a sense of genre come into your writing process at all, or is that something that's more discovered when you talk with the publisher about how the book's actually going to be marketed?
Yeah, I suppose I should talk to the publisher about this sort of thing, shouldn't I? And I'm always there, talking to my students about genre and how important it is. And if any of you are listening now, close your ears up to what I'm about to say, because I'm a bit of a transgressor in terms of genre in this sense. I think I don't like the idea that genres should be restricting us. I think they should be an enabling thing, and I think I did very consciously think of the first 3 novels in terms of a private investigator type story. I, from the outset, thought of the second 3 novels more in terms of spy stories. And in my concept of the third trilogy, if it ever came about, would be more in the realm of the sort of geopolitical thriller. And so there was that from the outset. But yes, I've gone into sort of, in terms of subgenres, they are different. So you've got private investigator for The Bullet Catcher's Daughter. You've got a kind of body snatcher horror for Unseemly Science. You've definitely got a heist story for The Custodian of Marvels. With the Queen of All Crows, it's an ocean-going pirate story. Yes, there be pirates. Yes, and with the Outlaw and the Upstart King, it's a kind of grimdark fantasy. And certainly commenting on grimdark fantasy. And with this, it's more of a courtroom, high court sort of intrigue type story. So they have actually worked out in that way, partly by design, partly just this was the necessity of the stories.
And I love how that sometimes gives quite a different narrative voice and a different palette of colour, really, to the stories. So when we got into the Outlaw and the Upstart King, where we are in Newfoundland, and it feels a very kind of feudal, dark, kind of closed-in world, and even the register of the language just completely changed. And it's interesting that you describe that as having this kind of grim, dark quality to it. I think that's one of the real pleasures for us as readers, that we kind of go off and have different adventures, but the whole atmosphere of the world that we're inhabiting changes as well as you break open a new boundary and go off into a new place as well.
I'm kind of conscious that we've been running on for a little while now.
Yeah,
I can do a little reading if people want.
Oh yes, that seems a good idea.
And
we've got one last question that came in.
Do you want to give that
yeah, and this is, I've been saving this actually because it's a bit of a kind of rounding off thing. There is the question about, will the gaslit empire ever fall? And there are some hints about that throughout the series. It's not called The Fall of the Gaslit Empire for nothing. And does it help to know that your readers are listening to your struggles? This is Jim from The Hague.
So Jim from The Hague. So first of all, I'll answer the second part of that first. Does it help to have this kind of interaction? And to know, it helps immensely. Writing for me is an exercise in honesty. That's ultimately, you're trying to be completely honest, albeit through the medium of stories that are made up situations. Yes, honesty through lies. So very good. And so the conversations I have through social media with readers and other writers through that process is immensely meaningful to me, and it feels absolutely like part of the same process. So I'm really grateful in that sense to all of you who kind of share the journey with me, because it would be terribly lonely without it. And I just feel compelled to talk about it and to explore it and all that sort of stuff. So that's kind of the answer to one thing. Then, will the Gaslit Empire ever fall? Well, so I've written 6 of these books, and according to my original plan, there would be another 3. I just don't think I could stand the burden of writing another 3. So I've conceived it as 1. And I also felt I wanted a break. And so I'm writing something completely different now, in a different world, in a sense. It's contemporary fantasy. I look forward very much to sharing that with you as well. I'm writing that speculatively. I haven't got a publisher lined up or anything. But I feel that there is a kind of implied contract between me as the writer and all you guys who've been helping me along the way.
Definitely.
And I don't feel I could leave you without having completed my side of that, which is to have the Gaslit Empire fall. So somehow, at some stage, and it's not right now, it might be a few years before it happens, but somehow I will do that. I intend
more
to.
Important than the fate of the Gaslit Empire is Elizabeth. We definitely want to see where Elizabeth goes next, for sure. So
I have kind of written a bit of a plan of like the first act of that novel.
Yeah.
And it's all very speculative. I don't have a publisher for it. Had the sales of these books been up in the hundreds of thousands, then that would be a kind of easy choice. I could do it.
Yeah.
But I'm, however much love there is for these books, it's not reached that wide an audience. And so there is a commercial question as well.
Yeah.
So, all those things balanced means, yes, I've kind of committed to myself, I will write that final novel, but I'm writing something else now. I think as writers, we progress, we move on, we develop when we are able to kind of put one project to bed and embark on another project. I certainly felt that in between the trilogies, when I moved from Elizabeth's voice into this kind of third person voice, I felt my what I was able to do as a writer kind of leapt forwards. And I kind of want that to happen again. So right now I'm writing something else, which is I'm tremendously excited about, and this isn't the place to talk about it, but I'm really looking forward to sharing more of that. So yes, it'll fall. Not if I have the strength to do it, it'll fall, and that's the best I can say.
Very good. So shall we hear the reading?
Okay, yes, I'll just a short reading, and then after that maybe we can have a cake.
Oh yes, and there'll be birthday cake.
There'll be birthday cake. So this is going to be about 5 minutes. I'm just just saying this to my able assistant just off on the side, and maybe the cake could arrive. So this is just a short scene, which seemed, I was looking through for a scene to read, something that would give me a chance to touch on some of the themes of the book. And I've found this one, which is a little way in chapter 9. And Elizabeth has been held captive by agents of the International Patent Office, and now she is making this, she's made her escape, or the initial part of her escape, and she wants to head west to Oregon, where she thinks her brother may be, and if her brother is there, then maybe the mother that she lost as a child will be there as well.
Yeah.
At the main gate, she paused to don the agent's coat, which was too long for her, and to button it up. With her hair tucked underneath his hat, she seemed less a woman. The illusion deepened as she opened her stride into a masculine gait and allowed her shoulders to roll. She didn't know whether the clothes and the body language were creating a disguise, or if they revealed a facet of who she was, or if she was somehow conjuring a memory of her lost brother. Either way, it felt different. From a distance, she was a man, a tourist on her way into the small town, unusual at that time of night, but not vulnerable. Close up, it would be another story. Distance was the trick. Not just keeping away from people on the street, but putting miles between herself and the hotel. It was perhaps 3 a.m. The agents would wake at 6:30. She'd timed their routine over the previous days. Julia might wake an hour later. Tinker could get up at any time. She'd left cushions under the blankets on her bed to make it seem as if she was still asleep. If no one had noticed by 8 o'clock, it would be good fortune. 5 hours, then, was all she could hope for before they set out to search. By the time she reached the town of Niagara, dawn had not yet begun to show in the sky. She passed the hotels and guest houses, the shops and restaurants, always choosing the downward slope until she reached the river itself, the wharves, jetties, and chandlers. Large boats were moored along the quayside, but she wanted to find something smaller. At last she came to a cluster of single-funneled steamers with side paddles, little more than engine and cargo hold, no space spared for comfort. Walking closer to the edge, she shifted back to the female gate and allowed her heels to clack more heavily on the stones. She'd passed 3 boats before someone appeared, the silhouette of a hatless boy sitting up from among a pile of blankets on the deck of a 30-footer. "Where's your master?" she whispered. He made no reply, but scrambled on hands and knees to the cargo hatch, which he lifted. She couldn't hear the words he spoke down into the belly of the boat, but after no more than a few seconds, a man hauled himself out. He seemed fat at first, but spidery legs and arms gave him away. Layer on layer of clothing made most of the girth around his stomach. He clambered up to the quayside and stood, blinking at her. "I need help," she whispered, gripping her pistol hidden within the pocket of the coat. It wasn't loaded, but if it came to trouble, they wouldn't know. "I need to get away from here. I've got money." "You're in trouble?" "They're forcing me to marry," she said, hoping it sounded plausible. Niagara was a place for weddings, after all. "Who's forcing you?" "My uncle and aunt." "You don't love him, then?" She shook her head. He scratched his. "I'm an orphan," she said, not knowing if it was true. He looked her over as if seeing her for the first time. The man's hat, the oversized coat. He ran his tongue over his lips. He was calculating, sure enough, as was she. What kind of man wraps himself warm in the cargo hold and leaves a boy under a blanket on the deck? Her palm felt sweaty against the pistol stock. The boat lay low in the water. The cargo hold must be full already. Where are you bound? She asked. Cleveland. Where's that? She was giving away her ignorance, but needed to know if it was east or west. His eyes narrowed. You talk funny, like a queen or something. Where's home to you? London. My people are shopkeepers. Well, Cleveland's 2 days west of here, but we don't take passengers. From the boy's glance at his master, she could tell it was a lie. I can pay, but you'd have to leave early. He stroked his chin. Leaving early would be extra. $20 is all I have. That's the very price. He held out his hand, palm upwards. She didn't move. How quick can you get the boiler up to pressure? He scratched his chin, as if beginning to suspect that she was more than she seemed. 3 hours. Do it in 2, and I'll pay double. You said 20 was all you had, and you said you don't take passengers. I'll leave it there.
Brilliant. Okay, so and that sounds
So there may be
a conjuring trick.
A conjuring trick. Let's have a quick look through here. What have we got?
So they were responding to what we were talking about. The gaslit empire was going to fall.
Edwin and Elizabeth are pure examples of gender as performance art. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah.
I think there's something very profound in that.
Magic has always been a performance art, and the Gaslit Empire is a puppet show of the patent office.
Interesting,
Yes.
interesting. How much planning do you do, or do you write in the dark? Says Colin. I plan the main beats of the story, and the rest I discover along the way. And something is on its way. So, shall I reach over and grab that? And here we go.
You can't have a book birthday
without a birthday cake and 6 candles.
So
6 candles because we have 6 books.
Yes.
And we also we have plates as well. Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Okay, so
you make the wish.
Make the wish. Any suggestions? The wish.
We're wishing to see more of Elizabeth.
Yeah. Okay. I get the picture. All right, 1, 2, 3.
Fantastic.
Right, there we go.
Lovely.
And the smoke rising from the cake.
Lovely incense.
Thank you. Can I pass that over? And we'll cut into that in a little bit. So I did promise that there would be prizes.
There'll be prizes.
I think what I'm going to have to kind of sift through this to discover. There's going to be a prize for the most interesting question, so we'll consider that, and also there's going to be a prize for photographs. I'm going to quick look at to see on Twitter, see if anyone has.
I was just looking at whether we'd missed out there.
Any more questions or anything on Twitter? Let's just see. Looking here. No, all the action's been here. I have had a very, very lovely photograph already posted to.
It was rather good.
It's been fabulous, and with permission of the person who took the picture, if they give it, I will certainly share that more widely. So, other than that, I think I just want to thank you, Siobhan.
It's been my pleasure, really,
for coming along and interviewing me, and I want to thank everyone for this amazing sort of interaction. And I have to say that it's been rather fraught getting to this point.
Yes.
I actually accidentally deleted the feed.
A few technical glitches with the magic trick.
So it's all new, and I didn't know if we would get to see the questions.
That's worked really well, actually.
And yes, Jim, we did answer your question. I hope you've had a chance to hear that, and so we'll sift through that, get back to you. huge thank you to for coming along and sharing this moment. And that's really it. We're going to eat some cake. We're going to have some tea. Thank you. I love you all. It's really been lovely to share this time with you in this virtual book launch.
Yes.
And thank you.
Bye-bye.
And I'm going to end stream. Bye-bye.